Have you ever imagined meeting your biggest idol and, on the same day, having your life completely transformed? What if I told you that a simple pair of sneakers could change the destiny of a young man passionate about basketball? This is an unbelievable story which proves that dreams can come true in the most unexpected moments. Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player of all time, has always been synonymous with overcoming, determination, and epic moments on and off the court. But what happened at a charity event left everyone open-mouthed and proved that the heart of a true champion goes far beyond statistics. Imagine a packed gym, people cheering, athletes showing off their skills. In the midst of it all, one boy stood out. Not because of his height or his impressive talent, but because of something that caught Jordan's attention in an unexpected way. The young man played with a pair of counterfeit sneakers, which were so worn out that one of them had a hole, right in the toe. Now stop and think, what would you do in Michael Jordan's shoes when you saw this scene? Would you ignore it and carry on with the event as normal? Or would he take action that would change that boy's life forever? What happens next was something no one expected. And when Jordan realized what was happening, he made a decision that moved everyone present. Michael Jordan was there, surrounded by fans, cameras, and flashes. The charity event brought together young athletes full of dreams, all wanting to impress the greatest basketball player of all time. But in the middle of that crowd, something made Jordan stop. He narrowed his eyes, focusing on a boy running from one side of the court to the other. His game was fast, his energy contagious, but that wasn't what attracted attention. It was what he carried on his feet. The boy was wearing a pair of fake Jordan sneakers that were so worn out that the fabric could no longer hold up. On his right foot, a hole right in the big toe left his foot exposed. With each dribble, with each start, the finger appeared and disappeared. But the boy didn't seem to care. For him, those sneakers represented more than just footwear. They were a symbol, a dream. Jordan crossed his arms and watched. He had seen it all in his career. Millions of fans wearing their sneakers, people paying small fortunes to have an original model. But there, right in front of him, was a boy who played with worn, wholly counterfeit sneakers. And yet, he played as if he were using the best equipment in the world. With every play, Jordan saw more than just one kid playing basketball. He saw himself. I remembered the skinny kid from Wilmington, North Carolina, who once dreamed big, but at first didn't even have a decent pair of tennis shoes to play with. He knew what it was like to want something with all his might and not have it. But what impressed most about this boy was not his lack of resources, but his passion for the game. Jordan then began walking toward the court. The buzz started. The people around realized that something was happening. Some pointed, others murmured, but the boy remained focused on the game, without noticing the approach of his greatest idol, until suddenly, the sound of dribbling stopped. Silence took over the gym. The boy looked up, and his eyes widened when he saw Michael Jordan standing right in front of him. What happened next, no one expected, and you won't believe this kid's reaction when Jordan finally opened his mouth to speak. The boy was paralyzed. His heart raced. He blinked a few times, trying to make sure his eyes weren't playing tricks on him. Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball legend, was there, standing right in front of him, looking directly at him. The entire gym held its breath. Everyone knew that this was a special moment, but no one, not even the boy himself, could imagine what was about to happen. His name was Daniel, a 14-year-old boy who had been breathing basketball since he could remember. He grew up playing on the streets, improvising hoops out of trash baskets and spending hours training alone, perfecting every move as if he were preparing for an NBA Grand Final. Your biggest dream? Play professionally. But he knew the path was difficult. No money, no structure, no support. All he had was his passion for the game and that old pair of fake sneakers bought with a lot of effort by his mother at a neighborhood fair. The sneakers were already past their wear limit. The fabric was frayed. The sole was beginning to come loose, and on his right foot, a hole revealed his big toe with each movement. But Daniel never complained. He refused to let the lack of proper equipment get in the way of his performance. For him, what mattered was the ball in his hands, the sound of his dribbles on the floor, the adrenaline of each shot. As long as I had the chance to play, nothing else mattered. But at that moment, everything changed. Because there, just a few feet away, was Michael Jordan. Daniel felt his legs weaken, but he tried to maintain his composure. He didn't want to appear weak in front of his biggest idol, but Jordan had already figured it all out. He saw something in that boy's eyes that he recognized very well: the hunger for victory, the resilience of someone who doesn't accept giving up, even when all circumstances are against him. Jordan then stepped forward. The entire gym watched in absolute silence. Daniel swallowed. His breathing was rapid. He wanted to say something. He wanted to say how much he admired that man. He wanted to tell how he dreamed of one day following in his footsteps. But the words just wouldn't come out. It was then that Jordan looked at the boy's feet. His gaze stopped exactly at the hole in the sneaker. He stood there for a few seconds, saying nothing. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. What was Jordan thinking? Would he laugh? Would he order him off the court? The answer came unexpectedly. Jordan smiled slightly and pointed to the sneakers. "Good sneakers," he said. The tone was serious, but there was something more there, something that no one immediately understood. What did he mean by that? Why, in the middle of such an important event, was Jordan focused on some random boy's old torn-up sneakers? Before continuing, tell me, if you were in Daniel's shoes, what would be going through your mind at that moment? Comment here. I would not react, or I would try to say something, but I wouldn't be able to. I want to know your opinion. Jordan kept his eyes fixed on Daniel's feet. The boy felt his face heat up, as if suddenly everyone was looking only at him. The silence in the gym became more and more intense, and every second seemed like an eternity. Daniel knew that his sneakers weren't the best, but he had never felt so uncomfortable wearing them as he did at that moment. He tried to hide his right foot by placing it slightly behind his left, but Jordan had already seen it, and he couldn't look away. Jordan's mind went back in time. He remembered his own difficulties in his youth. He remembered when he was cut from the school team and had to prove he was good enough. He remembered the days when he didn't have money to buy the sneakers he wanted so much. And there was that boy, playing with absurd energy, without caring about anything around him. But now, in front of him, Jordan could notice a detail that went unnoticed by everyone. Daniel didn't want anyone to notice his sneakers. He wanted them to look at his talent. Jordan frowned, watching the boy's every move. He didn't hold back on the court. With every dribble, every cut, every basket attempt, he played as if it were the most important game of his life. What impressed most was not his speed or his ability with the ball. It was his determination. Even with his feet practically coming out of the sneakers, even with his big toe visible with each takeoff, he didn't hesitate. It wasn't limited. He wasn't embarrassed. The gym was packed, but it seemed like there were only two people there at that moment: Michael Jordan and Daniel. The public followed the scene without understanding exactly what was happening. But one thing was clear: Jordan was taking in every detail. He didn't just see a kid playing basketball. He saw a young man who, despite the difficulties, demonstrated what the true spirit of the game meant. Then, without warning, Jordan stepped forward. His eyes, once full of analysis and curiosity, now reflected a decision. He knew exactly what he needed to do. Something inside him said that this meeting was not by chance. The hole in the boy's sneakers was no longer just a detail. It was a symbol of persistence, and he couldn't ignore that. Jordan stood there still, watching the boy's every move. Something about that scene moved him in a different way. It wasn't just a young man playing basketball. He was someone who, despite the difficulties, refused to give up. He saw the intensity in the boy's eyes, the way he dribbled, the way he ran across the court without hesitation, without fear, without caring about the precarious condition of his shoes. This sent Jordan back in time. He remembered his own childhood, of the skinny boy who trained alone in his backyard, throwing an old ball into an improvised hoop. He remembered the times he was left out of the school team and told he would never be good enough. And most of all, he remembered what it did to him. Instead of accepting failure, he turned every word of doubt, every difficulty, every obstacle into fuel to prove he was destined for something greater. Jordan's gaze dropped to the boy's feet once again. Those sneakers weren't just cheap, worn-out shoes. It was a symbol of their struggle. The boy didn't play waiting for someone to give him something. He played because he loved basketball. He played as if he were wearing the best sneakers in the world, even when one of them had a hole right in his toe. Jordan crossed his arms and let out a slight smile. He recognized that spirit. It was the same thing that propelled him to become the greatest basketball player in history. And he knew that that boy, despite the difficulties, carried the same flame within him. But at the same time, Jordan felt a tightness in his chest. He knew how difficult it was to grow up without resources, without support, without the minimum conditions to practice the sport he loved so much. How many kids like that had given up before even getting a real chance? How many incredible talents had been erased simply because they were never given an opportunity? It was then that he made a decision. He wouldn't let that moment go unnoticed. He wouldn't ignore what he was seeing. He needed to do something, something that went beyond words. Jordan took a deep breath and walked toward the court. Each step seemed to weigh more than the last, not because of tiredness, but because he knew he was about to change that boy's life. The entire gym followed his movement in silence. Everyone wanted to know what the basketball legend would do. Daniel, on the other hand, felt his heart race. He couldn't believe what was happening. The greatest player of all time was coming straight towards him. What did he want? Was he going to order him off the court? Would it attract his attention because he was playing with counterfeit sneakers? When Jordan finally stopped in front of him, Daniel felt his legs shaking. He tried to maintain his composure, but adrenaline took over his body. Jordan looked at him, then looked at his feet, and then asked the question that took everyone by surprise. "What is your name?" The voice was firm, but there was something about it that made Daniel feel comfortable. He swallowed hard and replied softly, "Daniel?" Jordan nodded, as if he was processing that information. Then he pointed to the boy's worn-out sneakers. "Daniel, you play very well, but tell me, why do you play with these sneakers?" Daniel looked down, feeling his face heat up. Shame took over him. He knew his sneakers attracted attention, but he never expected to have to explain them to Michael Jordan. After a moment of hesitation, he took a deep breath and answered truthfully, "Because it's the best I could do, and yet I love playing." The answer was short, but full of meaning. Jordan felt a lump in his throat. He knew exactly what that meant. He has been in Daniel's shoes before. I already knew what it was like to play without having the ideal conditions, without having the necessary support. But Daniel wasn't complaining there. He wasn't asking for anything. He just wanted to play, because basketball was his passion. Jordan remained silent for a few moments, analyzing that boy, the determination in his eyes, the way his posture showed no regret that he was wearing old fake sneakers. There was something special about him, something Jordan couldn't ignore. "Now, tell me, if you were Daniel, what would your reaction be at that moment?" "I would be speechless or I would cry right away. Comment below." Jordan continued to stare at Daniel, but now there was something different in his gaze. It wasn't just curiosity or surprise. It was a profound recognition, as if he saw in that boy a younger version of himself. The silence in the gym was almost deafening. Everyone held their breath, waiting for what would come next. Then, taking his time, Jordan turned and walked toward the event organizer's table. He picked up the microphone and brought it to his lips. "I want to tell you a story," he said, his voice firm but full of emotion. The entire gym remained in absolute silence. No one dared to interrupt. "When I was young, I had a dream, but it wasn't easy. My first year of high school basketball, I was cut from the team. They said I wasn't good enough, that I had no height, no talent, but I didn't accept that. I spent hours, days, months training, while others rested. While others slept, I was on the court. I didn't have the best shoes nor the best structure, but I had one thing that no one could take away from me, the desire to win." Jordan's words echoed through the gym. Daniel listened to each one of them attentively, feeling his heart beat faster. He knew this story, he had already read about it, but now he was hearing it from Michael Jordan himself. Jordan paused, and then turned his gaze to Daniel. "And now, I see a boy who reminds me of who I was. He plays with passion, with determination, without excuses. It doesn't have the best features, but that doesn't stop it from shining. That's what makes a true player." Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine. His hands were sweaty, his legs felt weak. He wanted to say something, he wanted to say thank you, but his voice just wouldn't come out. Then Jordan did something no one expected. He approached Daniel again, bent down and pointed at his sneakers once again. "But a player like you needs footwear to match." The gym erupted in murmurs. What was Jordan about to do? What did he mean by that? The entire gym waited in silence, as if time had stopped. Daniel's eyes were wide, his breathing was heavy, and he just couldn't process what was happening. He looked around, trying to find some explanation for that surreal moment. But then, in front of everyone, Michael Jordan did something that left the world speechless. Slowly, Jordan began to untie his own sneakers. He crouched down in front of Daniel, who could barely move. Jordan's hands slid over the laces as he removed, one by one, the legendary sneakers that had graced so many courts, won so many titles, and been part of one of the most brilliant careers in basketball history. The audience began to murmur, not believing what they were seeing. The legend, the greatest of all time, was barefoot now, holding his own pair of sneakers in his hands. Then, without hesitation, he looked directly into Daniel's eyes and said, "These are yours now." The audience took a second to react, but when they finally understood what was happening, the gym erupted in applause. Screams, whistles, tears, cell phones raised to record the moment. It was unbelievable. Daniel looked at his sneakers without being able to move a muscle. His mind struggled to accept reality. His hands shook as Jordan held out the pair to him. The boy felt his legs weaken, and for a moment he thought he was going to faint. But Jordan wasn't done yet. He stood up and picked up the microphone again. The gym, which was still ecstatic, fell silent again. "I've seen many talents emerge, but few have the passion and dedication of this boy here, and that's why from today onwards." Jordan paused, looking at Daniel, who was still holding his sneakers, in disbelief. "You will be officially sponsored by my brand." The noise was deafening. The entire gym collapsed. Some people in the audience were crying, others were shouting Jordan's name, others simply didn't know how to react. Daniel felt tears burning his eyes. He tried to hold them, tried to stay strong, but it was impossible. A sob escaped, and then tears began to stream down his face. That moment was bigger than anything he could have imagined. Daniel looked at the sneakers in his hands, as if they were a treasure. He still couldn't believe what was happening. His fingers passed over the details of the leather, feeling the texture, the firmness, the quality. They were real. They were real. And now, they were his. He blinked a few times, trying to hold back the tears, but it was impossible. The crying came suddenly, without warning, and he simply let his emotions take over. With shaking hands, he sat down on the court floor, and with all the care in the world, began to put on the sneakers that Michael Jordan had just given him. When he slid his foot inside, he felt something he had never felt before. The comfort, the perfect fit, the feeling that those sneakers had been made exactly for him. He tied his shoelaces slowly, as if he were living a dream he never wanted to wake up from. When he finally stood up, he felt the difference immediately. The cushioning was another level, the stability, the security. For the first time in his life, Daniel knew what it was like to play with real tennis shoes. He looked at Jordan, his eyes still teary, but now there was something different in them, a determination I had never felt before. I'll never forget this," Daniel said, his voice breaking. Jordan smiled, a real smile from someone who knew he had just changed someone's life. He stepped forward and placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Now play like no one can stop you." The audience burst into applause again. Some screamed Daniel's name. Others still couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. That boy who previously played with fake holy sneakers was now there, wearing Jordan's own sneakers, in front of the greatest player of all time. But more than that, something inside him had changed. He was no longer just a kid playing basketball. Now he was someone who carried a legacy. And you, if you were in Daniel's place, what would you do right now? "I would run around the court," or "I would collapse with emotion." Comment below. The years passed, but that moment never left Daniel's mind. The day Michael Jordan not only gave him a pair of sneakers, but also something much bigger, the belief that he was capable of achieving his dreams. That simple gesture, which began with a look of empathy and ended with an entire gym applauding, completely transformed his life. Daniel was never the same after that encounter. He trained with even more dedication, as if every drop of sweat he shed was a way of honoring the gift he had received. Now every time he laced up his sneakers before a practice or game, he remembered Jordan's words, "Now play like no one can stop you," and he carried that phrase for the rest of his life. Over time, Daniel began to stand out in youth basketball. His inspiring story spread, and many began to follow him. The boy who previously played with fake, holy sneakers was now seen as an example of overcoming. He was gaining ground in tournaments, attracting the attention of coaches and scouts. His name began to circulate in sports circles, and it wasn't long before he received his first big opportunity, a scholarship to play for one of the best basketball programs in the country. But the most incredible thing of all is that Daniel never forgot where he came from. He became an inspiration to thousands of children who, like him one day, dreamed of playing basketball, but didn't have the necessary resources. He started visiting needy communities, telling his story, and encouraging young people to never give up regardless of the difficulties. For him, every child with a dream in his eyes was a reflection of who he had once been. And then one day, something happened that made it all worth it. After a great match, in which he stood out, Daniel was called for a live interview. The reporter asked him what the most important moment of his career had been so far. Daniel smiled, lowered his head for a moment, and when he looked up, he replied firmly, "The day Michael Jordan showed me I could do it." The gym collapsed in applause. The world knew his story, but now everyone understood the true meaning of that moment. Daniel never forgot the day that changed his life. But more than that, he learned a valuable lesson. A simple gesture can transform destinies. What for Michael Jordan may have been a momentary act of generosity, for Daniel, it was the spark that ignited his future. And this raises an important question. How often do we ignore opportunities to make a difference in someone's life? How many stories like this could there be if more people reached out at the right time? Basketball has always been more than a game. It's about overcoming, discipline, hard work, and above all, opportunities. What would have become of Jordan if he had quit when he was cut from the team in high school? And what would have become of Daniel if that meeting hadn't happened? Sometimes, all someone needs is a push, a word of encouragement, an act that shows that it's worth keeping fighting. Now imagine, what if you were in Jordan's shoes? Would you have ignored the boy or done something that would change your life? Or if you were in Daniel's shoes, would you have believed that that moment could be the turning point of your future? These questions make us reflect on the power that each of us has to impact the world around us. And that's why I want to know, have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar? A small gesture that made all the difference in your life or someone else's life? Comment below. I've seen it happen, or I believe in the power of transformation. Let's make this story reach as many people as possible. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who loves basketball. Who knows, maybe this message will reach someone who needs exactly this type of inspiration today. And believe me, this is not the only story that will move you. Get ready for something even more shocking. Michael Jordan's daughter, heir to the biggest name in basketball, walked into a designer sneaker store and was humiliated in a revolting way, all because of the color of her skin. But what happened next left everyone speechless. You can't miss this awesome twist. Click now and discover how a simple moment can bring out the best and worst in people.